Welcome to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. I'm your host, Troy Hammond, and on today's episode, we're chatting with my good friend, Kimberley Gilmour, and now business partner, Kimberley Gilmour. I want to give a disclaimer on this episode. It's heavy in parts, and we talk about suicide. Kimberley's partner and my friend Angus, who is a massive part of the startup ecosystem, committed suicide, and if this triggers you, I want you to know up front. We also talk about the new venture Sprinklr that Kimberley, I and Dan are on. And I want to just recognize this up front. I would have got Kimberley on the podcast regardless to tell her story because I love her and she has an amazing story to share. I'm just lucky I get to now call her a business partner as well. And so I hope you enjoy this episode. It's fun, it's sad, it's inspiring, and it's full of knowledge.
Kia ora. Thanks for tuning into the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
So I know you as Kimbog. Many others know you as Kimberley Gilmour. Why do I know you as Kimbog?
At Vend was just when I first started, and our leader, Brian, asked us to do some kind of online test. And you know, when you always have to create a username, which is never your real name because there's been some version of you before, I put Kimbo G. And that got shortened into Kimbog, and that was my name forevermore. Slack, email, it's all Kimbog.
Kimbog. I loved it at Vend. It was it just kept going, didn't
And
it?
it was unlikely.
Yeah. Oh no, the chief people officer being called Kimbog.
Yeah, Boggy.
Yeah.
I think you used to call me Boggy.
Yeah.
Matt Searle, Boggy.
Yeah. Shout out to Matt Searle. I love that guy.
Yeah, he'd be a good guest.
And so we're like, I knew you. We worked together at Vend. I think you didn't come in as the chief people officer.
No.
You were there before me, right? Or
Just before? Yeah, just before. I came in to look after APAC. So at that time it was New Zealand, the biggest market in Australia.
yeah. And had you always been in people and culture?
Pretty much, yeah.
And so where did it start for you? Let's go back. You're on the couch now.
Yeah, I know, it's deep. So my first role in the general area was at the Ministry of Education, of all places.
Because you were like Wellington, right?
Wellington, came down here for university and stayed for a good few years after that. But before even Ministry of Education, I spent a year in Japan because, like many of us, when we finished university, I had no clue what I was going to do with the degrees that I'd studied.
Why Japan?
Different. It was a different place. Wanted to put myself out of my comfort zone. Didn't know anyone there. Didn't speak the language. Didn't have any friends.
Did you learn any of the language? Or
I did. Yeah.
I learned arigato.
That's a very good one.
Yeah.
Nice. Sugoi. So a year in Japan, came back, had a cracking student loan, it's probably 35 grand, applied for a bunch of jobs in the general kind of human resources space. And the first offer I got was at the Ministry of Education and the Industrial Relations team. So I started when the teachers and the government had been at a standoff for about a year.
Oh, wow.
It was pretty intense.
Straight into the fire.
I know, straight into it, yeah. But it was a really good job to help me really understand the value of building relationships and building relationships with people who have the opposite point of view. So I still have really strong relationships with the union that I worked with during that time.
Yeah.
I stayed there for 3.5 years at the Ministry of Education. But I knew early on that environment wasn't the right one for me. It was slow. It was obviously very bureaucratic. I remember my first week, one of my jobs was to write responses to people who'd written to the minister. So I had to write in his voice to the person who'd written. So if you ever write to the minister, it's not really them writing back to you.
Yeah.
And I did.
Why does HR do that?
IR, because it gets funneled
yeah.
to the department which is most appropriate to answer that particular question. So it was something to do with probably something to do with the standoff with the teachers. And it took me, I don't know, a couple of hours to write, and I put it on my boss's desk, and she said, looked at me so shocked, and she said, "You've got a week and a half to write this." And I was like, "Oh my God, okay."
Yeah.
But it took me still 3.5 years to make a call to move. But, student loans, bills, young.
Yeah. So how did you know that you wanted to, how did you know that corporate world was faster paced? Did you just assume?
I just assumed. I had friends who worked in it, but I just assumed. Assumed. And it never felt like a natural home to me being in government. Like, I really value the experience I had, but it didn't feel like it was the place that I was going to spend my career.
Yeah. I think government is a fantastic training ground for people. And people often hear me talk about startups and rep them and say that, startups are the nirvana. Government's a fantastic place to work. And they move a lot faster now than they ever did before, but, definitely not as fast as crazy fucking startups move, right? And so what was your first job after education then?
I started working at Icebreaker, and the way that I got that job was obviously completely unsuited to it. Icebreaker was
the
clothing company, So at that time it was Wellington based. There were 65 people in New Zealand and like a sprinkling of distributors overseas, but growing. And I met the CEO and his wife at the time at a bar, and we started talking, and CEOs always be selling. So he was telling me all about Icebreaker and kind of like razzle dazzle. And then a couple of months later, I saw an ad in the newspaper because that's how jobs got posted then.
Yeah, we're aging ourselves right
there. So I applied for it. And because of the nature of our email exchanges, I went in so unprepared. Like, I was like, oh, this will just be a friendly chat. And I went in and sat down, and I was just being like a normal social person, and then they grilled me, and it was a bloody good lesson. The CEO and the COO. So I kind of walked into something I completely wasn't expecting, and it was a very kind of naive move to go in without really preparing myself for it. And I didn't get the job. And they rang me a couple of weeks later, and they said, you know how we declined you for this job? The person we offered it to didn't accept it. And we think you'd be really great culturally, but we know you haven't got the experience, but we still want to offer you the job. Are you in? And I was like, oh, yes.
Wow. That's a bittersweet moment, right? It's like, I didn't get the job, but fuck, I got it.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a real career making role, because during the 5 years that I was there, we grew from 65 to 350, and from New Zealand to primarily not New Zealand, so Australia, the US, Canada, 3-4 European countries.
Is that so? For people listening to this, mostly our audience is tech-based, right? I set up this podcast and I called it We Fucking Love Startups, because I didn't want it to be purely just tech. I didn't want it to be We Fucking Love Tech Startups, because I love to be able to just talk to anyone from business. So Icebreaker was the same feeling of growth, the same feeling that you get when you're working in a tech startup?
Yeah, totally. It was very much, although it was profit funded, so it wasn't VC funded, which gave it a different feel around growth. So growth needed to be justified because it was coming out of the pockets of the founders, and they were making real businesses. There was no kind of hyper growth in that way, where it was like just throw money at it and the metrics will work themselves out. The metrics were baked into every role that was brought into the business from the beginning. Yeah,
the unit economics of like clothing and FMCG and
exactly. Yeah.
And so, talk me through that. How does someone who's been told that they don't have the right experience, but we trust that you're going to figure it out, like, how do you go in there and make it happen? Do you fake it?
I've totally faked it, yeah. Built relationships. I started by joining the running clubs that were going in the mornings, and there were people from all across the business doing that, which was awesome, because that's, you don't often get a chance to interact with people that are not in your direct team. But also, just learned as much as I could on the side. Worked all the time, like an unhealthy amount of working. If it was me now, I probably wouldn't do that. But at that time, I worked 7 days a week.
Do you think that this is a really topical point, right? The hustle, hustle culture, bro. Do you think that is key to building a career, like that, getting in there and just working and figuring it out, and probably when you're young and agile, doing more than you should, or more than you need to be able to craft your career?
It's interesting, because if I was working in an organisation now and someone young was doing that, I would probably be concerned and I'd want to talk to them about it. But on the other hand, if I hadn't done that, I don't think I would have been successful in my role. So I think there's definitely an element where you just need to knuckle down, learn as much as you can, put in whatever is required, especially if you're not as skilled as someone else might be for the role. Like, I really wanted to make myself not so much irreplaceable, but make them happy for having made the decision to bring me on. Yeah.
It's a double-sided coin for me, right? Like, it's because, like, I look at some people in my team who come in a little bit earlier, they get some tasks done in the morning that, because, once 9 o'clock hits, we're on the phone, we're doing things, and they get a few things done in the morning that makes them more successful. And then I look at some other people who come at 9 to 5, and I think, each to their own in terms of how you learn and what you do, right? But the ones that push themselves a little bit more, I give them more opportunities because I want to reward them, but I don't want to burn them out, right? And so it's a dilemma that I think about a lot, if I'm honest.
I do too. And I think too, it's the people who can push outside those hours, it's privileged. Like you may not have responsibilities outside work like somebody else does with kids or with aging parents or with health issues. And so does it kind of exacerbate the gap that already exists?
Yeah. I think for me, like you've got to be aware enough to know that some people can only do 9 to 5 or 9 to 3 part-time or whatever it may be. And I see those people, they come to work, they're on from 9 till 3 or till 5, and they work hard, they learn a lot, and for me, that's fantastic.
Absolutely. And there's a difference between people who kind of clock in at 9 and clock out at 5 and people who are super focused when they come in at 9 and leave at 5.
Yeah. So, awesome. And so, Icebreaker then. So, what was the founder's name again?
Jeremy Moon.
Yeah, he was pretty iconic, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was 24 when he started the part of the business where he took over and grew it fast, and he was extremely visionary and very charismatic and was really able to rally people behind him and behind the business and the opportunity. What
did you learn most from Icebreaker? What were the key fundamental things for you that you were like, this, you said that was your career-making role.
Yeah.
Why?
I think, again, probably a follow-on from the first one around building relationships being so key to being able to be successful in a role, learning, admitting when I don't know something rather than trying to necessarily make it up fully as I go along. I think there's some part where you need to just fake it till you make it, but there's another part where you don't want to fuck things up and make it worse.
Yeah.
What else would there be? I think I know that I love the energy of growth and New Zealand companies taking it to the world. And so that experience really ignited something in me that I wanted to keep working in this kind of space. And I didn't know it would take me to tech, but that was kind of where most of the companies that had a similar vibe were kind of operating in.
Yeah. So talk me through that. So you go from Icebreaker to Vend.
Yeah.
And
Not directly though, yeah.
Not directly?
Yeah. So, we were talking about working 7 days a week until you burn out. So I did.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was burnout at the time, and who knows whether it was actually burnout. But what I do know is when I left Icebreaker, I felt this massive weight fall off my chest and I could breathe again. I didn't even know that I was carrying that around. And so I ended up traveling for 6 months after Icebreaker and trying to just work out what the hell I wanted to do with my life now. And it's a hard act to follow a role like that too. And I left initially because my mum had a stroke, and I came back to New Zealand. I had an opportunity overseas with Icebreaker and came back to New Zealand, and that opportunity wasn't here. So had to make that call to be here for my family, and I think it was the right thing and I don't regret it.
Is this pre your father passing away? Or?
This is pre my father passing away, yeah. So my mum had a stroke first and then my father passed away a few years later.
Yeah. And so you took some time, and I think this is something that you've had, which is like knowing you, this has been a theme throughout your career, right? Is that you are really self-aware when you need to recharge. And I often know that Kim bogs off in the jungle for the next 2 weeks, right? Like you go off on some crazy run or some crazy walk, and I love it. I love it because I know that that's your time to recharge. And so,
well, I think for me, being intentional about what I do is really important. Like I've never been an autopilot kind of person or do what people think I should do kind of person. And the way that I get the space and kind of courage to do that is to go and spend some time by myself somewhere in nature and with no one else around. So
yeah, I love it. It's my favorite place as well.
So good,
especially on your own.
Yeah,
it's the only time that you can fully recharge and find out who you are as a person.
Totally. Yeah.
So what was it about, because you love startups, right? You love tech. What was it about going into Vend that you were like, all right, I found my people? What was it?
I think, Kirsty Grant, who was doing all the hiring at the time that I joined Vend, I knew when I met her. Oh, God, yeah, awesome.
Love Kirsty.
She's so great. Yeah, so I met her, and as soon as I met her, I was like, She just had, it was just a feeling. It's not even like a rational, logical thing. I just met her. She kind of sold the Vend dream, and I was like, I need to be
Did
part
the
of
same
this.
thing to me, right?
Need to be
I was
part
like,
of this.
okay, we're all following Kirsty. Let's go. What are we
Totally.
doing? I'm in.
Yeah, no, she brought on some amazing people into
Yeah.
Vend. So that team's just so much of the talent that was brought into Vend is due to her.
Yeah, and I love watching her now doing it with Amora.
Yeah.
Like with all her lessons learned and everything now, and the version of Kirsty now is fucking remarkable.
Yeah.
Like the iteration of Kirsty, I should say.
Yeah.
So you went because of Kirsty and the people, right? And what did you find in tech that was different?
I think, it's always easier with hindsight to say what was different. And the journey of Vend, and I know you've had Vaughan on and maybe some other guests from Vend, but my experience was when I first started, it was the hyper growth stage, and it's kind of like this real sense of excitement and adrenaline that comes along with that. So each fortnight there were like 10, 15, 20 people starting all around the world. And so just that excitement of going after and feeling the company's successful and all these people have got these great opportunities. Like that is one of the things I love about startups is it creates opportunities for anyone in the business to take their career in a place that they would probably not be able to do in a larger, slower, more corporate environment. Like you just kind of get thrown into the deep end and have to make it work.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting question, right? And it's an interesting thing that whenever I ask people about, like what was special about the first startup, right? They always said the people, right? And I often think back and I think, well, it really was for me too at Vend, right? Like the people were fantastic.
Yeah.
And is it really that those particular sets of people were fantastic, or was it because it was the first time that I was in a company like that where I was around people who shared the same vision, the same ethos, the same DNA as me, and it was just dynamic? Because I think like lots of startups are the same, but it's just the first time you're exposed to it, right? And it feels special.
It does. The energy is like quite different, I think.
But Vend had a particular really strong people and culture team, and it was a big team, right?
Big team, yeah. There were 10 people when I started, and I don't know, 250 maybe. So it was a really high ratio. And I think Vaughan's wife at the time, Mel, being in that space probably helped him understand the value of it. The experience as a person working there was pretty exceptional. Yeah,
it was a well-respected people and culture team. I worked in Wellington and you were in Auckland, and so every time I came up to HQ in Auckland, the people and culture team sat right next to the finance team, and like we had so much fun. But people would just come over and chat with us, right? Like it was a really welcoming, open people and culture and recruiting and finance team, right?
Yes, and I think part of that was this intentional calling of the team, people and culture, not HR. And I think a couple of times people would slip up and say HR or say HR to wind us up like you sometimes do now. And I think even though that's quite subtle, I think it sent a really strong message that this team is about you, people, and about nurturing the culture. Yeah,
that really is the heart of the team, right? And so why people and culture, right? So why people experience, people and culture, HR, human resources, why in your take should we call these teams that?
I think it's just the essence of it, really. I think anyone can do human resources, and it's just the most revolting term. It's like as if people are not multidimensional, just resources that can be moved around or told to behave in a particular way or not in another way. And I think the term people is just inclusive and open, and culture, a company without a strong culture is probably not going to be able to keep their people for one thing, but it has no heart. And so I think having people and culture together in a team and that being a really integral part of the business is so essential for it being successful.
The verbiage people is a big, powerful statement, right? So last night I was out for drinks after work chatting with a couple of business people, and we're talking about the recession and talking about layoffs, and someone at the table said, and I won't say who it was, like, oh, we're just in that time where human capital, sometimes you have to lose about 20% of your human capital to be able to sustain the company so that you can grow going forward. And I sort of stopped and I said, people, right? You're losing 20% of the people. And he was like, what? And I was like, well, these are people, right? Human capital was like saying cattle, right? Like, they're people, right? We're losing 20% of the people. And you could see just the lights sort of go on for him when I said the word people. It changed the way he thought. And he was like, yeah, actually, right. And so
I think if you use terms like human capital, you don't have to think about the people.
Yeah.
Like you really are thinking of them as just a resource of the organisation that can come or go or be brought on or just, disestablished at whim without really thinking about it too hard. And I do think using the term people and culture and coming at it with that heart and mindset means that those hard decisions are harder because you know and care about any impact on the people that you've built relationships with and helped grow their career. And so anytime that needs to change, it's hard.
Yeah, awesome. I agree. Really special time at Vend. I really had a really good time, and I watched you grow into the Chief People Officer. Is that because, you had anything special, or was that because you were epitomising what the culture of Vend was? Like, why do you think you were able to grow into that role?
I don't know the answer. That's probably a good question for Vaughan or somebody who's not me to answer. But I do know that the growth path wasn't, it came about because of circumstances that weren't from me. So, for example, I went from People and Culture APAC to VP of People Operations, which looked after Canada. We had a person in Canada and a person in Berlin because our boss left, Brian. So that came about because of that circumstance. And then Chief People Officer came about through the restructure. So even when Vaughan called me to ask if I wanted to be the Chief People Officer, it was really hard for me to be excited because at the same time we were letting go of 75 people. And so it was a responsibility. I thought about it really hard, and I wanted to do that role so that I could guide and help lead through that really tricky time. But it was hard to be excited about it on a personal level. Yeah,
let's talk about that time for a second, because I think, I don't think this came up with Vaughan, but I think we touched on it in certain ways, but I know it affected him from conversations that I've had. So I was, as I said, in the Wellington team, a really small Wellington satellite office. For some reason, I think I'd been trying to resign for like the last two weeks because I was like wanting to pursue this, like, I felt like a caged bird in one company, right? Like I felt like I was like locked into the recruiting team of one company, and I was like, there's so much more I could do. And so I kept trying to resign, and Kirsty kept saying, no, just hang around and do this. And so I think she was trying to get me to move to Auckland at that stage. And so she said, come up to Auckland and have a look at some houses and things. And then I came in to work one day that week, and I saw you and Jordo and a few other people crying at the photocopier. And I was like, oh, this isn't going to be a good day, and because we couldn't know, obviously. But instantly when I saw that, I was like, I know what's going on. And so talk me through that day and what do you do when you're leading a people and culture team and a business?
Well, I think the hard thing about that restructure was that it was so quick. And I got a call to come over and join the leadership team unexpectedly, which is usually a bit of a sign that something's not going to be great. Yeah. And then the news was shared that we needed to do this, and it needed to happen really quickly. So I think that was one really hard part about it. And the other part was that we knew the almost flip side of having such a strong culture is that people are so bought into it, and their friends are there, and they have a very strong identity and attachment to the company, which is incredible when you don't need to make these decisions, but really hard when you do. And so a lot of my role with that was making sure that my team, which was people who were going to be in the conversations as well, we all were taken care of too. So it's just as hard for them to be delivering the news as the people leader. So we spent a lot of time just being really honest with each other about what it was going to be like, letting feelings come up like you would have seen, and then just being there for each other and, debriefing and working through that stuff and accepting that this is just shit. Like there's no version of this conversation that's going to be good. It's going to be some version of bad to terrible, and the best you can do is be human and open and sit with people having hard feelings and not put your feelings onto them having hard feelings, like not crying in the room if you're the one delivering it. So
I think it was handled well at Vend. I think looking back, the only thing that was weird was we were moving in upstairs into those new offices at the time, and they were like these weird old 1970s
like call centre style.
And so we were all in these weird little 1970s corporate Mad Men rooms being made redundant, and it just didn't feel right because of that nuance to me. But I think largely the way it was handled was good. And
it was tough because there were 6 countries that were affected. So for that conversation, I was in Berlin with Sherrard letting the Berlin team know because all of them were being let go because the office was being closed. So the logistics of trying to manage that process across 6 different legal jurisdictions and different teams and different conversations happening was really tough. And it wasn't just me. There was Mel was heavily involved, and we had other people in. So it was a big team effort to get that logistics side done, so that when you're in the conversation, you can be present and you can be a human, and you know that the process side's taken care of.
Yeah, I remember you telling me at one stage that you said that something about being called the Black Widow, or you felt like a Black Widow. I can't remember if it was you felt like, or someone
told me that was my nickname.
Oh,
I didn't know. I think it was Antonio. And he said something about the Black Widow, and I was like, is that what people think of me?
Oh,
it was
fucking hard, right? To walk into an office and have to close it down, or to tell, there was, 50 people or something in Auckland, was it? Or like 40 people in Auckland?
There was 75 in total, so that probably something in the 40s,
Yeah, horrible thing, right? And how do you rise from that? So Vend did a really good job of Phoenix from the flames off the back of that recession. And I think a lot of people don't know what happened, not recession, with that restructuring. A lot of people don't know what was happening behind the scenes. I don't even know it's public knowledge, is it?
I'm not sure.
Well, I'll just openly say it, and sorry, Vaughan or anyone. There was a VC involved that we didn't pay in the last minute, right? And so it was an unfortunate reason for the restructure, but for that reason, we were growing so fast and moving, and everything was like a rocket ship. And then when that doesn't happen, holy shit, you've got to abort.
And I think too, not being able to share that is the reason made it hard, because just 2 weeks before we were talking about how we just hired a new person in Berlin and things were going well. So it being so quick and not being able to be fully transparent, because we were still in a fundraise at the time, and we needed to make sure we could secure the round.
Yeah. So how do you grow from that? How do you, because the first restructure in a company creates cracks, right? And how do you mend those cracks going forward?
A lot of FaceTime with people, being super available. So all of the leaders, all of the people in culture team just needed to be visible and present and around and checking in. And, that whole survivor guilt thing is very real.
Really is.
Yeah. And also not trying to kind of smooth over it and be like, okay, let's just move forward now. It's like we need to kind of go through the bit of a grieving period and accept that that's where things are at, and then start kind of looking forward to the new future, because it was a different strategy after that restructure as well. It was a different game to be playing.
Yeah, I remember it vividly, right? I remember Neil at the time, who was the coup chief operating officer, telling me, okay, we're going to go through this process and blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh yeah, I'm happy. If it's me, I can help support people, right? And so I was like, let me set up Talent Army. Well, I didn't even know what it was going to be called then, to help people find jobs, do whatever I can. But I remember talking to people, and I wrote a LinkedIn post the other day, I'm not sure if you saw it, around lots of people are being made redundant in this market. And, how to think about it as it could be a good opportunity. And for me, I had a newborn baby, had 2 kids.
Was Mitch just a baby?
Yeah, Mitch was literally a baby.
Wow.
I remember I've got photos of Nano Girl being in the office with Mitch and Molly and Mitch pooed his pants. He was just a tiny little kid, right? And it was smelt, and people were like, what the hell does that smell like? He was early. And then I lost my job, and I remember thinking, and then I told my wife at the time, I'm going to set up a company now. And she was like, you're fucking crazy. But good things come from bad situations.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And that was the message I was trying to get off on LinkedIn.
I think that came off, and I think you're 100% right. I know, maybe it was at the 8i one where you came in and we had people telling this story, because most people at some point in their career have been made redundant. At that time it wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't as talked about as much. It wasn't as much of a thing. But when people in that situation, and I've been in it as well, when you see that some other people who maybe you can, I don't know, you can think you might be a little bit like them, have taken the step to do something differently as a result of it, it just gives you a bit of hope, and hope is really what you need around then. Because
it feels like a personal attack on you. You are being told that you're redundant, right? Even the word, right? And so, you look at, and you think, oh, well, they're not made redundant, right? And then they have survivor's guilt. And
Yeah.
then you're like, well, what's different about me than them? And unfortunately, it's nothing to do with you.
It feels so personal though, yeah.
It does.
What I have built and created and given to this company is not valued anymore enough to keep me. It's hard.
Especially in a startup, because it's like a family.
Yeah.
And, when you have to wave goodbye to some of your family, it's fucking tough.
Yeah.
So how long did you stay on at Vend afterwards?
God, dates, I'm not very good with dates, but I stayed through, I wanted to stay through the immediate, I was going to say aftermath. I guess it is an aftermath, like the initial rebuild stage. But it was a pretty grueling. And because by then, through this process, I'd been really associated with it, and I didn't know if I was the right person to be leading the charge going forward. And I was tired, and as much as Vend was a great place to work, it really took a toll, that experience. And I left. I didn't even want to work in human resources anymore.
Yeah, you moved to the mountain, you hippie.
Yeah, I totally did. Studied nutrition, I know.
I was like seeing green smoothie Kimbog, was the new Kimbog.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I only want to be part of things that are good and good for people and help people. So it really, it spurred a different direction for me. And then studied nutrition, and I was like, oh shit, nutrition isn't actually the thing I want to do. So then I studied health psychology. I started my master's in health psychology, and then through that, which was a bit more rigorous intellectually, it brought together some things that I'd learned in my initial qualification and just stuff that I really cared about. And then that ended up leading to a focus on workplace well-being. And then I thought, okay, maybe people and culture, HR, can be done differently, like with this different way of looking at things. And with the experiences that I'd had at Vend and Icebreaker, can I come in and approach people and culture differently than I had before, with a much stronger grounding in understanding human behaviour and people. And
yeah. And that was when some guy called you and said...
Some idiot recruiter, he's like, hey, come back to Wellington. You love Wellington. It's an awesome company, great leaders there, no restructuring.
Well, no, you said to me, you asked me, I'll interview if you can guarantee that there's going to be no restructuring. And I was like, Kimberley, we've just raised money. It's growing really well. Like, it's going to be the next big thing in New Zealand. I need you to be part of it. And you're like, all right, I'll come down, provided there's not going to be any restructures. Fast forward how long?
One day. Literally my first day.
Yeah.
First day in a meeting with the leaders, talking about values, talking about should we roll out the values, and someone said, do you think we should wait until the restructure is complete? And I was like, what restructure?
Yeah, well, obviously I wasn't privy to that information, right? Otherwise I would have fucking told you. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
But I watched you go through that process with a new light about you. Like, you handled that so fucking well, and I was so grateful that you were there because of the things like you did, that you made sure people came in and talked. Mm-hmm. You had so many great one-on-one conversations with everyone. Like Owen, speaks really highly of you, particularly in that situation, and a few other people that I've spoken to, because it was tough for them as well. And the same thing over again. It was like a lot of people's first startup, and
and you've brought people in. If you're a leader, you've hired people, and you've often hired people from other places and sold them the dream, and then now you're having these conversations. So it was.
You promised them no redundancies, and
that's right, exactly. But we
so 8i was a virtual reality company ahead of its time, making holograms with studios and stuff like that. Actually, I just saw. I'm not sure if you've seen the NBA. Did this new thing, has this app now where you can take a phone around you like Holo was, and it just 360 shot of you on a phone, and then it turns you into a hologram that puts you into the game, the NBA game, and as your avatar. And I was like, man, Holo, where was Holo? That's what they should have done.
Catch the boat, yeah.
But virtual reality was a cool fucking company.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
It was, really great.
And you moved to Wellington. Mm-hmm. You moved with your then partner, Angus, which Angus was the CFO of Timely.
Yeah.
He was previously the CFO of Vend.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned earlier, people and culture and finance used to sit pretty close to each other. And a couple of times I remember saying to Kirsty, what's going on over there, right? But I had no idea until afterwards, actually. It wasn't until after you'd left Vend that it became apparent.
Well, It was only after I left Vend that we actually officially became an item.
There you go.
Yeah, I know, and people don't believe me, but it's true.
You were pretty much sitting at the finance table there for a while, like because you did all the recruitment.
I did.
And,
That's
and
right.
people
Yeah.
So, I remember there was a time when you guys were making some fucking flaming rocket or something outside.
Oh yeah, it was an interview. We didn't even hire him. I thought we should have. I think I worked very closely with Angus professionally, but also one of the things I noticed with him, you may have as well when you came up, was he would walk in and sometimes he would just walk in so dark, like he looked so low, and he worked himself into the ground, like he worked so hard. And I remember thinking, maybe if I'm just going to make a bit of an effort to be friendly to him and see if it makes a difference to his day. And so whenever he'd walk in, I'd always be extra friendly and I'd go over and be really nice to him. And I'm not going to be afraid of this, because some people interpreted that as being intimidating or angry, but I didn't get the sense that it was that. I just thought that he didn't seem happy.
Yeah, I knew Angus from having to understand him as a hiring manager to be able to find the right people for him. So I knew that there was this soft, cuddly man there, but he did have a gruff exterior, right?
He did.
But he was always busy. He was always tired.
He was smarter than anybody else. He was so smart. Yeah.
So his brain worked so fast. And I used to come in early in the morning, and him and Antonio would always be there, right? Like really early. You know, like you could see that they'd been there for hours already, and then stay late. You know, and
it wasn't good. Yeah, it wasn't.
And
good.
so you and Angus obviously got together, moved to Wellington for 8i. Angus was working for Timely.
Came into here, right? To your office to work from,
Yeah, he sublet, or I don't even know if we charged him, to be honest.
Just came and perched
I just
up
want to hang out with Angus, right? Like, fucking, I love that guy. And we'd just fucking talk about UFC and fucking crazy shit all day, and like, you know,
gangster rap.
Yeah, terrible rap music
Swear your
we'd
heads
play.
off.
You know, could
have some ciggies, sneaky
ciggies.
ciggies.
We don't talk about that anymore, Kimberley. You know, Troy's a good guy now, but and then one day, I got a phone call from Ryan, and he said, "Do you know where Angus is, mate?" And it wasn't unusual for Angus to not turn up to the office, and so I said, "No, I don't know, but you know, it's not unlike Angus." And he said, "But he hasn't logged on at work today, mate." And I was like, "Well, that's unusual." And so I called you, or I think, or I know he said,
Ryan texted me,
he said, "Do you have Kimberley's number?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And so then I'm not sure how I found out, but I gave him your phone number. Ryan texted you, and you were away at a wedding.
I was away at a 40th, and I had come back to Wellington on Monday morning and gone straight to the office because I was due at the office at 8i. And then I'd messaged Angus and he hadn't answered me, and that also wasn't super unusual. I thought he could be, just in the zone.
Yeah.
And then I got a text from Ryan, and as soon as I got the text from Ryan, like my heart dropped, and I went straight home. And I remember in the Uber on the way home, I was like, my whole life can change in the next couple of minutes. And I got home and Angus had taken his own life.
So Angus, we know and loved Angus, and Angus was pretty vocal about mental health issues that he'd gone through. And he and you previously to that had gone to LA because he wanted to seek treatment, and there was this new ketamine-based treatment that you could be an outpatient for to try and help with his mental health problems.
He had tried everything, honestly. I've never known someone to work so hard on something. He tried nutrition programs. He tried every type of talk therapy. He was
running, for fuck's sake.
He was running in the morning. He was up at the crack of dawn, like literally forcing himself out the door to do that. We did the Camino de Santiago to see if that would help. And he'd been researching this treatment for a few years, and so we decided to do it over the summer break, and we went and did it.
And I don't know if I've ever said this to you, but the way I believe in my heart is that this was Angus's last thing, right? He was like, if this doesn't work, this is what I believe in my heart that was happening in Angus's head, was that he thought that if this doesn't work, nothing will. And so because he'd been trying to get into this program for so long, right? And then finally got in, and then he came back, and my understanding was that he told you, it's worked. I feel fantastic.
Yeah.
I feel great. You've got that wedding to go to this weekend. Go, because I'm so great. But in his mind, he was telling you to go because he couldn't have you there, and he knew it didn't work. And so, I went and saw you that day. You know, it was a fucking horrendous day. You know, you had this beautiful friend come around, I remember, and she walked around the house to help with Angus's spirit to leave the room. And I remember just feeling, what was her name? She was Huya. What a lovely lady she was. Like, you know, it was such a beautiful moment in a horrible situation. And then, you know, it was a tough time, Kimberley. It was fucking horrendous.
It was, yeah. I mean, I've never lived through anything more heartbreaking and challenging as that experience. And thank you for being there, especially in those early days when everything's a blur and everything hurts and there's a lot to be done. There is a lot to be done when someone dies.
Conversations with his parents and timely and what the hell, and trying to find his MacBook and, you know, like, it was fuck. And all that time your partner, you know, is gone. Like, fuck, Kimberley, it was horrendous.
Yeah, it was awful, and I don't think I would have gotten through it without the support of very close friends. I know I couldn't have. I didn't. Once we got through the funeral, I just didn't care. Like, I didn't care about anything else. And the only reason I got up and did anything was because people would wake me or come and get me or bring me some food.
Was your friend up the coast?
Melissa.
Yeah,
like,
shout out to Melissa.
Yeah.
I love you. She was a great friend to you.
Yeah, she was and still is. And yeah, she loved Angus. And one of the things it was obviously awful. I spent 6 months or so floating between here, Wellington, and Tauranga, where my family was, and my nieces and nephews. You know, kids don't have any shyness around talking about stuff, so they would still talk about Angus, and
because they loved him, right?
Angus, he was incredible with kids. He had such patience and presence with them, and they just loved him and loved being around him.
Yeah. Rest in peace, Angus. I miss you so much.
I mean, I think, you know, with the Vend and Timely acquisitions, I had real mixed feelings when those were announced. And
you would have been so happy.
Totally. And proud. And
So, yes, the other day, the team put up on Instagram that we really want to get a finance person on the pod to talk about startups, right? And so many people, like, forwarded that message to me and said, I would have loved to watch you and Angus on the podcast together. You know,
we would have had a great time.
Fuck, it would have been funny.
Yeah.
You know, like we'd have Red Bulls either side of us right now. The amount of Red Bulls that guy used to have on his desk.
He cut that cold turkey, you know.
Oh yeah. Like, well, he did it for you, Kimberley. Like, he did a lot of these things for you because he wanted to go on and live a life with you, and it got to a point where sadly he couldn't. And unfortunately, I've had a few people in my life commit suicide, and it's hard to be left behind with so many questions.
Yeah.
And I have so many mixed feelings on suicide. But I come to the place that he just couldn't go on anymore.
I think so too. Like, I don't blame him for the decision. I wish he was here every single day. I don't blame him for the decision he made. I know what a toll it took on him and how hard he tried, and
he just missed those next couple of years, right? Fuck, Vend being acquired, Timely being acquired. He was instrumental on both. How do you then, because you obviously didn't work, right? You went to Tauranga and how do you pick yourself up again after that, Kimberley?
I did a lot of things. I mostly just gave myself permission to not do anything that I didn't want or feel like doing, which for a long time was actually nothing. But the couple of things I did do, one is I went for a walk every single day, and two was I'd started this, it sounds so twee, but I'd started this gratitude practice years before, and I kept that up even every day after Angus died. So every day I still looked for 3 things that were good in that day, and sometimes it was just...
What is the gratitude practice? Talk.
Each day I just write down in my journal 3 things that were good that day, And it might just be like today, it might be that you invited me to do this podcast. It might be that when I caught the bus, someone smiled at me and it felt good. So it's just little tiny things every single day. Yeah, and it's not huge things. It's just little things, like noticing the small things. So I did that, spent lots of time with kids, had incredible friends who were there for me. I did some contract work after about 6 months with a friend. And I think I did an ayahuasca retreat.
How was that?
Hard to put into words.
I just dropped on the last podcast with Mary that I did an acid and psychedelic experience. Probably shouldn't have said that on Mary's podcast, but I'm a big believer and it worked really well for me, right? And so, well,
one of the things that happened for me was, apart from all the crazy imagery, was when I had when it was supposedly finished, I got the giggles and I couldn't stop laughing. And then the laughing turned into tears because I hadn't laughed for over a year.
Yeah.
And I got this message, though, that laughing is part of my healing. So that helped me to not feel guilty about letting myself be happy again.
Because the Kimberley I know laughs all the time.
I know.
Right? And I'm not sure if there's a TV show on Apple. It's called Shrinking. With, And, there's the scene where it's the first time she's laughed since her mum dies, and then it ruined her day because she found herself happy. And then her psychologist says, dedicate 15 minutes a day, put a really sad song on and just fucking cry and get it out, right? And we don't let ourselves feel feelings, so...
Well, it's so painful, right? Like going through an experience like that, my body was so numb, I couldn't feel anything. Because my body wouldn't let me because it was too hard. So,
How did you get back on the horse, metaphorical horse? Because you then went to UneeQ. What wasn't UneeQ at the time? What was there?
Face Me.
Face Me, that's right, yeah. How did you do it? How did you get back? Was it just that you just loved the space and wanted to be back in it? Was it...
Partly I had an inkling that I might love the space, but I don't think I had it in me to love something like that at that time. But I did meet the CEO, Danny, and as soon as I met him, I thought this leader is someone who cares so much about his people that I think he will want to do things the way that I want to do things. So it was really just that, again, like this feeling, it's just this feeling of this being the right person to be in my life. And he was amazing. I didn't talk to him about Angus until a few months after I'd started because I didn't want to be pitied.
Did he know?
He didn't. No.
Yeah. Dan speaks really highly of him. Dan, my business partner in Auckland, as just being an amazing human guy.
He is,
and so I was so happy when I heard you were going into a job, I was protective, and worried. And I said to Dan, "What's he like?" And he was like, "He's a great leader. He's gonna be great." He
was amazing. Like if I was to design the perfect leader to work with at that time, it would have been him. And one of the things that helped me make the decision was we were making a digital human for Sir John Kirwan, and I thought, that's okay. And one of the values was tech for good, and I thought, okay, there's something in that little sign that this is a space that I want to be in. And I'm still involved with the UneeQ 5 years in. So
Awesome. And so then 5 years, was it 3 or 4 years in with UneeQ, you decided to move to Groov, another company that has rebranded their name since. So now Groov, formerly Mentamia. And so what's that company?
It's a workplace wellbeing company, so set up by Sir John Kirwan and Adam Clark, entrepreneur. And so they work with organisations to create a culture of wellbeing. And I had worked alongside them in a way because UneeQ and Mentamia had a partnership and again we'd created the John Kirwan. So I knew the team, many of the team in there, knew the CEO, and the CEO was actually on the board of UneeQ for a little while. So they had an opportunity to come up for a head of people role. And I wanted to stay with UneeQ and I wanted to do the new job. So I ended up doing both 50%, which was...
You crazy fucker.
I know. I mean, we all know 50% is never 50%. So I did that for 9 months. But it was really important to me to do that because Danny really backed me and gave me a lot of autonomy and leeway to do things how I wanted to do them. And we'd been through some tough times. COVID had been tough on UneeQ.
Yeah.
And we'd had to restructure. And I wanted to stay through all of that and just help with the rebuild. And so the culture there's awesome. The culture at UneeQ is still as strong as it ever was. And so that to me showed that you can get through these times and come out stronger even.
Yeah, yeah. And then, so I grew for a while. And then if I go back about 5 years ago, I said to you, hey, Kimberley, one day when you're feeling better, because it wasn't, I don't know how many years ago it was, a couple of years ago, or whatever it was. I said, when you're feeling better, when you're up to it, I want to start a business with you. I said, I want you to come and join Talent Army or create another separate company because you truly understand what it's like to be leading a people and culture team and processes inside a startup with just absolute authentic, vulnerable, honest, learn knowledge, right? And so I wanted to start a business with you. It wasn't the right time, and so we put it on hold. But then when you're at Groov, when you're at UneeQ, you Talent Army moved into the office, and we're like, hey,
get away from each other.
Hey, getting a bit closer. You started working with Dan a lot. Dan, my business partner, and pretty much best mate. And then we started having these conversations again about we need to do something, right? We need to do something for the industry because Talent Army, it can only do so much. We're a recruitment company. We fucking love startups, right? And it is our passion to help the industry. But we couldn't do it through the lens of people and culture because
you're too inappropriate.
Oh, well, I shouldn't be. I don't even know how they'd let me sit in the P&C team at Vend, right? So Dan is really good. Dan can sit at that table. He can have a foot in both camps. I'm like in the naughty corner. But I wanted to do something authentic. And so I wanted to bring someone else in who could do it with us and run it. And so we have now decided to set up a company called Sprinklr. Sprinklr without the E.
That's right. You can't have extra vowels if you're working with startups.
Yeah, exactly. Get the domain. So you have come on as the CEO and co-founder of Sprinklr. Sprinklr.co.nz for people that want to see it. And so what is Sprinklr?
Yeah, so Sprinklr, we help startups grow, and specifically we work with founders and leaders on all things people and culture, so helping them create a great people experience and set things up so that their people and their company can thrive. So we've talked with a bunch of startups, obviously, as part of the process of coming up with what we want to offer and what we do offer now. So we work across 4 main areas. So the first is the people experience. So that's any practice that an employee will experience in their time with an organisation, from onboarding to career development to benefits, compensation reviews, well-being. So all of these different experiences that people will have in your company, we help create processes and practices that work for your size and your stage of company, because it's not the same for every company.
Yeah.
The second thing is we help people get ready for recruiting. So whether you choose to do it internally or whether you choose to use recruitment partners, we can help you with your employer value prop, recruitment processes, job descriptions, referral programs, so that you're ready to grow your team. You've got everything in place to remove the friction and toil from that process. The third thing is a bit boring but necessary, around compliance. So making sure that people have got the confidential files in place and contracts before they start working.
Because we both know that a lot of times we get into a startup and they don't even have an employment contract.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not super exciting for anyone to do, but it's really important, and it's not really that hard. It just requires a little bit of focus. And part of that too is lots of companies in New Zealand want to start with an offshore entity as well, so we can help with setting up offshore. Yeah. And the last thing is navigating the hard stuff with care and with authenticity. So whether that's just being a sounding board when a leader's going through something tough with someone in their team, or someone in the team's going through something tough with their leader, we can be a sounding board, we can offer advice, we can let you know what the processes and options might look like going forward around potentially restructuring if that's where you go, and outplacement, and how do you look after your people through that.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you something. So the reason why I've had a problem with, I'll call them HR companies, right? Because I don't believe they're people and culture companies. I've had a problem with HR companies that try to work with startups because they don't get it. They try and come in with the absolute top 4 consulting lens. This is the way you should do business, and this is blah blah blah, human capital, and they use all these terms from the right. Over the years, I've generally resonated with people who get startups and get people and culture or people experience, whatever you call it, through the lens of every startup they're unique to, and they're different, and it's a faster paced work, and sometimes you can't do all the fancy fucking projects and stuff like that, right? You just got to get in there and help and support them. And so what do you think is it about that Sprinklr or working with startups that is different through a lens of people and culture?
I think accepting that things will not be the same process or practice going forward. Like, we're not building, if it's a company of 20 people, we're not building a process that works when you have 400 people. We're building something that works for now, and that'll evolve as you grow up, or grow your team and have different leaders. So I think like all of us are deeply passionate about startups and have worked in startups and get that there's real differences between different startups are different from each other. It's not that there's going to be the same process or practice if you're 30 people in different industries.
Yeah. And it's like, that's my problem with like these influencer type people, right, who get into startups because they see it as an opportunity to influence their brand and do all these things.
Right.
But they just go about it. They don't care. They really don't care. They're using it as an opportunity to build a platform for themselves. And so that was the reason why I wanted to work with you.
Because I don't care about that.
Well, no, because you just fucking love the craft of what you're doing, and you know that every time you walk into a situation, it's different, and you have lived a fucking 100 lives in people and culture, dude. Like, you have
a lot happens in a short space of time.
Yeah. And you're like, if people listen to this podcast, right, they're like, so she's gone in, worked in a super high growth, fast Vend where everything was broken. Like, I remember due diligence once with the VC, and Vaughan rang me up and he was like, hey man, do you know how to write a policy on security and stuff? And I was like, no, but I can help. Like it was just fucking all hands to the deck at that stage, right? And then, you went to 8i, virtual reality companies, learn nuance, different things here, went to UneeQ in terms of putting it in place and practice. And then that was when you started getting into the understanding of like workplace safety and people and culture and mental health and the likes. And so like you've almost come full circle in terms of your growth to be able to say, now I can apply it through so many different lenses.
Totally. I'm glad we didn't do it 4 or 5 years ago when we were first talking about setting something up. I think where I'm at now and where we're all at now is so much better and so much richer. We've got so much more experience to offer.
Yeah, I think like, I'm not a religious man. I think since my, psychedelic experience, I'm probably more spiritual. But I believe that things happen at the right time for the right reasons. And so, I think startups are unique and a little bit different. And so having someone like you in that space that can help them with an authentic, I know what you're going through, we're not going to have to roll out this just yet, you can do this and help here and like that excites me, right? And so
thank you.
I have a genuine interest in the business, of course. Like, I'm not going to be working in it, but I'm fucking excited about the industry having people like yourself, that can go off and do this. And there's others, right? There's other little companies out there doing this, but no one really owning that space for startups, right?
And I think we want to give back to, like, through Sprinklr and through the kind of relationship with Talent Army, we want to give back to the ecosystem, to our clients, but also just share what we know.
Yeah. And so what does the future look like for you then, Kimberley? Like, you now, how do you feel about being the CEO of a company versus the chief people officer?
I'm excited about what we get to do. I don't care about the title per se, but I care about the ability to influence what the organisation is like, and that's the role of the CEO, the culture of the organisation, who you bring on, how you do things. Got a couple of people already in mind to bring onto the team, who I won't name on this podcast, but
they know who they are.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think we'll just see where things go.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I think, like, I've tried to do this in the past without you, and I'm so fucking happy now that we can do it with you.
Likewise.
I think Dan and you in Auckland have so much of a great skill set in terms of like differences that you offer. And like we've always talked about, right, like Talent Army and Sprinklr are going to be completely separate companies. If there's a chance that they can work together in the future with companies, fantastic, but we don't want it to be a thing.
Right.
I just love what Talent Army does, and I love what Sprinklr is going to do in the future. So do you think going forward now that like this is a good time to start a company? Like this is a good time to bring in someone like yourself, you know, like it's a fucking weird recession time that we're in.
I do think so. And one of the things I have learned from working across these different startups is it's really hard to know when the right time is to bring in this role, because there are always roles that should and do have a higher priority, such as building the product or sales or marketing or looking after customers, and bringing in a people role is a overhead to the business.
Yeah.
So what we offer with Sprinklr is the ability to bring in the expertise without the overhead, without the ongoing commitment, but you get to be able to tap into all of the experience that we've had before.
Yeah, Mary from Thailand was now was on the podcast last, and we talked about people being at the heart of everything, right? And I think it's crazy to me that startups don't see that if they invest in their people, you know, they're going to flourish and grow a lot faster. And so, you know,
well, we kind of see ourselves as the bridge between not having anyone in people and culture, and at some point you should have your own internal person in people and culture. And so we help with that stage in between those two things. And it's important to have that, otherwise you're going to get done here and it's going to be a shit show. So if you can bring in some expertise and practices earlier on, it's going to make things a lot better going forward.
Why the name Sprinklr?
Well, it could have been Belay.
Yeah.
Elevate. What were our other options?
Belay. Why was Belay? Talk us through that.
Belay, because we were trying to think of a metaphor, and we see ourselves as being the support act to someone doing the thing. So someone who's climbing and they have
on
a
the
belay.
rise. Yeah.
So we're at the bottom, making sure that things are all like that person's safe and have guardrails in place.
Yeah.
And Sprinklr, so I mean, you know, we riffed on this name for a long time, and one of the ways that we helped to try and come up with the name was to look at some imagery, and we saw this kind of Series A, like a little growth Series A, Series B, and it was like plants, and then had a little watering can, and we're like, oh, okay, maybe like, okay, we'll sprinkle, like we are the sprinkler that helps these companies grow.
Yeah.
When I was talking to a CFO the other day though, and he heard the name and he goes, is that because you help put out fires?
Ooh.
And I thought, well, we can do that as well, but we want to focus on the buildings.
Yes, it is. Yeah, whatever they say. No. I think, that for me, because I'm really passionate about this podcast, stopping the cutting of the tall poppies, right? Like letting seedlings and tall poppies grow even fucking bigger and hearing their stories. And so when I think you brought it up or someone brought it up, I was like, yes, like that for me, like, we're not part of the journey, like it's not our journey. We're just there supplement, helping, from the side. And so that Sprinklr metaphor really resonated with me, and hopefully it,
Same here,
it does others. And so Kimberley, you make me happy, like being around you are a positive, authentic person. From the first time I met you at Vend, I think we went out on dinner, like we did a team people and culture.
Is that when
dinner.
Jenny spat on my face?
Yeah. Oh my God, I just like replayed that in my mind. What? Talk me through that. Tell me what the fuck happened, because I'm the inappropriate laugher, right?
I think you may have been the cause of the laughter, and Jenny was sitting opposite me at dinner and something happened and she laughed, but her mouth was full, and so all of the stuff that was in her mouth went all over my face. Sprinkler, right? Like maybe it was an early indication.
It's meant to be. Oh my God, that was funny. Poor Jenny, German, like that was the first time in the country meeting us all, and then she spat all over her boss, hilarious.
She was awesome. She was super helpful through
She was
lots of the different stages
like I've
at
watched
Vend.
her grow her career, and it's fucking awesome to see her. Like, she was working for a VC for a long time, doing really, really
She's
cool
at type
things.
form now.
Yeah. So that you make me happy, Kimberley, but what makes you happy?
Well, it's funny because I'm a social person, but like you touched on before, the times that I feel most myself and most happy are when I'm by myself in nature. So anyone who's a runner might understand this a little bit. I'm sure everyone has their own version of it, but when you go for a run and you're maybe 20 minutes in and you're warmed up and you're just running along in nature somewhere, and I just get this little feeling inside, and it's like kind of bursting from my heart, and I feel calm and at peace, and everything feels like it's got perspective.
Yeah, that's because that's your new nickname now. It's not Kimbog anymore. It's Kimbo Runs.
That's right.
From your
that's right.
Insta handle. Yeah, Kimbo Runs.
That or the sauna. I mean, I just can't go past a good sauna.
How good is a sauna?
Best purchase I ever made.
Are you going to the sauna here on Tory Street while you're here?
I've got one at home.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't
fancy.
have no men in it as well. It's
nice
just
for
me
some.
by myself at home.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I hope that when the people are listening, I would have had you on the podcast regardless of working with you or not, because you and I have shared life journeys together, and I've been in admiration of you, the way you handle life, the way you work with companies, the way you are with people, the way you sit down with an employee of a business and have really amazing conversations with them to help them release their own potential. And so I hope anyone that knows you or I would know that we would have had this conversation regardless whether Sprinklr was a thing or not. But for those that are listening, this has been a joy for me. And so I really want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you. And thanks for talking about Angus as well. It was nice to remember him and bring him into this conversation too.
And you have an amazing partner now. And you're a
I do.
stepmom now.
I know.
And
yeah.
Kim, this brings me so much joy
Thank
when you
you.
and I chat about our kids and and oh my God. And so I'm so fucking happy for you.
Thank
It's
you.
so exciting. I think the future is bold and bright for you, Kimberley.
Me too. Thank you. Thanks
for
for having
coming
me
on.
on.
I want to dedicate this podcast to Angus Weir. Angus, we love you. You would have been so happy with everything that's happened over the last few years in the startup ecosystem. You would have been so filled with joy watching all your contributions come to life and be sold, and the money that's being spread around the ecosystem because of the things that you achieved. You'd be so proud of Kimberley and the person that she is now and her life. And I wish you well, my friend. Kimberley, I adore you. I could chat to you all the time. It was a fantastic podcast. It was raw. It was real. It was you. And this is the reason why I wanted to get you to come on the pod, and why I would love to, why I want to work with you going forward. And so I hope everyone enjoys it. I'm amazed at how well this podcast is doing now. We've got so many people watching it. We've got people reaching out to us, sponsorship. We've got all these things, and it's fantastic, the joy that it's bringing people in the ecosystem. So thank you so much. If you're not following, if you're not subscribing, this is your opportunity to jump on now. Thanks for staying with us right to the end. Thanks for enjoying the journey, and we look forward to a new podcast coming out soon.
This podcast is produced by John O'Tucker from Empire Films.